Let me tell you something about the moment the internet broke. Not crashed, not slowed down, broke. Like, servers on fire, timelines melting, notifications going off so fast that people's phones were physically vibrating off their nightstands. We're talking about the kind of moment where your non-wrestling friend texts you at midnight asking, "Wait, is that Speed from YouTube, in WWE?" And you just stare at your screen, grinning, because yeah, it is. And it was everything. Welcome back to Wrestling Impact, the channel where we live and breathe this sport, where we feel every near fall like it's our heart about to give out, and where we tell the stories behind the stories that WWE puts on television. Today, we're talking about one of the most unexpected, most electric, most chaotic announcements to hit Monday Night Raw in recent memory, and it involves a man who has hundreds of millions of fans worldwide, a WWE general manager who couldn't keep a straight face, and a curse that, honestly, might change everything going into WrestleMania 42. Adam Pearce, Ishowspeed. And a moment that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming quite like this. Let's go back to the March 23rd episode of Monday Night Raw. TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. The crowd is already roaring because 26 nights before WrestleMania 42 in Las Vegas, the stakes couldn't be higher. Roman Reigns and CM Punk under the same roof. Femi and Brock Lesnar on a collision course. The Intercontinental Championship picture heating up. Paul Heyman demanding street fights. Boston was already on fire before the first bell even rang. But somewhere in that building, something else was happening. Something that the wrestling world and the internet world had been quietly buzzing about for weeks. See, WWE had been internally discussing involving one of the biggest content creators on the planet in WrestleMania season. And not just as a prop. Not just as a cameo. As a genuine, recurring presence on the red brand. A celebrity with enough charisma, enough energy, and let's be real, enough pure unhinged personality to actually hold his own in the world's most demanding entertainment environment. Ishowspeed, the 21-year-old phenomenon who has turned a streaming camera into a global empire. The kid from Cincinnati who screams at video games and makes the whole world laugh, the same kid who, at WrestleMania 40, dressed up as a bottle of Prime Energy drink to support Logan Paul in a United States Championship match and somehow still made himself the most talked about person in the building. That guy. He was back. And this time, it felt different. The night kicked off with Speed already embedded in the fabric of the show. Not sitting in the crowd. Not relegated to one backstage photo op and then shuffled out a side exit. He was everywhere. Early in the evening, he was spotted backstage with the electric J. Yvonne Evans, the NXT call-up, who was heading into his own match against Grayson Waller, and the two of them shared a moment so natural, so genuinely joyful, that fans at home were already leaning forward in their seats. Speed wasn't stiff. He wasn't reading lines off a cue card. He was just himself. And himself is electric. But then came the moment that had the locker room talking. In one of the most genuinely fun backstage segments Raw has produced in months, Ishowspeed found himself side by side with none other than the WWE Intercontinental Champion. The look-at-her with the iron fists and the cold ice Penta. And if you thought those two personalities couldn't coexist in the same frame, you were wrong. Dead wrong. Because what happened next was pure magic. Penta, this menacing, mask-wearing champion who strikes fear into grown men's souls every single week, looked at Speed, and then he did the Penta walk. That signature strut. And Speed, this kid who has seen literally everything on the internet, looked genuinely, sincerely amazed. He mimicked it. He felt it. And for just a second, it wasn't a celebrity and a wrestler. It was two guys who both know how to command a room, both understanding each other on a completely different frequency. Dragon Lee was watching from the side. Speed looked at him and said, and I quote, "You're a dragon? I'm a dog." And somehow that made perfect sense. The locker room was already warming up to him. The talent backstage has a sixth sense for this kind of thing. They know when someone gets it and when someone doesn't. And Speed got it. Randy Orton said it himself months ago when Speed trained at the WWE Performance Center for his Speed Goes Pro series. The kid was ready. That he had what it takes to have a legitimate run in WWE if he ever wanted one. Coming from the Viper, a man who doesn't hand out compliments like candy, that means something. But the real story of that night, the moment that turned a fun appearance into a storyline with legs, hadn't happened yet. Adam Pearce, the Raw general manager. The man who runs Monday nights with a measured authority, who has wrangled everyone from Roman Reigns to Paul Heyman in that hallway outside the office, finds Speed somewhere backstage, and the two of them fall into conversation. And here's the thing about this moment, it wasn't just pleasantries. Pearce wasn't just shaking hands for the cameras. He told Speed, directly and genuinely, that he was glad to have him back. And Speed, this is the part that matters, Speed lit up. He talked about the names he'd crossed paths with that night. Roman Reigns, CM Punk, Brock Lesnar. Real excitement, not performance. The kid was starstruck, and he wasn't hiding it, and that made it real for every single person watching at home. And then out of nowhere, because that's the only way he arrives, Danhausen stepped into the frame. Now if you're not fully versed in the very nice, very evil one, let me paint you a picture. Danhausen is a free agent unlike anything WWE has ever incorporated into its universe. He speaks about himself in a combination of third person and chaotic logic. He puts curses on people. He gets the math wrong on purpose. He is, in every conceivable way, an agent of wonderful chaos, and on this particular Monday night in Boston, he locked in on Ishowspeed like a target. With a smile that could mean anything, Danhausen introduced himself as a WWE legend and informed Speed that he only had 183 followers. Speed, who has roughly 180 million, corrected him. Danhausen nodded, thoughtfully, and said, "Yes, that's what he said. 180 million. And then, as naturally as a man proposing a business deal over a cup of coffee, Danhausen laid it out. Speed should rename his channel Ishowspeedhausen. They would co-stream, split the profits. It would be mutually beneficial for all involved parties, including specifically Danhausen. Speed said no. Speed, who has navigated brand deals and partnerships with the biggest companies in the world, who can read a room from a mile away, looked at this man in face paint talking about splitting YouTube profits and said, flatly, no. And that is when Danhausen cursed him. Right there, backstage, in front of Adam Pearce, who, to his credit or perhaps to his absolute terror, was visibly, genuinely spooked. You could see it on his face. The general manager of Monday Night Raw, a man who has stared down some of the most imposing figures in the history of professional wrestling, took one look at Danhausen finishing that curse and quietly, swiftly, got out of there. He walked away. He wanted no part of whatever just happened. Speed stood there, jaw dropped, looking like a man who had just been told his warranty was void. Now here is where the story takes a turn, because Danhausen, ever the businessman, offered an out. Later that same night, a digital exclusive dropped Danhausen challenging Speed to a race. The terms were simple: if Speed wins, the curse gets lifted. If Danhausen wins, he gets the password to Speed's YouTube account. All 250 million subscribers gone in the hands of a man who thinks face paint is formal attire. Speed accepted. Of course he did, because Speed has never backed down from anything in his life. And Speed, let's remember, is known for his athleticism. The kid moves. He's not just a guy who sits behind a screen, he's a legitimately competitive young man with speed in the name. The race began. Speed flew out of the gate. He was so far ahead it wasn't even funny. He turned back, laughing, saying it was too easy. That this was nothing. That Danhausen had made a serious mistake. And then Speed looked up. And Danhausen was already standing at the finish line, waiting. Arms folded, smiling that smile. Speed lost. The curse remains. And somewhere in Boston that night, the WWE Universe collectively lost their minds. Speed reacted on stream shortly after, and his exact words were as perfect as anything a writer could have scripted. I'm cursed, brother. 3 words. Genuine. Authentic. The kind of reaction that makes wrestling real in a way it hasn't been in years, when someone from outside the kayfabe bubble steps inside it and actually feels it. Speed felt it, and so did every single fan watching. But let's zoom out for a second, because this is bigger than a funny backstage segment. This is bigger than a race and a curse. What Adam Pearce officially putting Ishowspeed into the fabric of Monday Night Raw means in the middle of WrestleMania season, with Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas waiting, is that WWE is making a very deliberate, very calculated statement about where the company is heading. Think about the blueprint. Logan Paul came in as a curiosity and became a genuine superstar. Bad Bunny came in for WrestleMania and delivered a performance that left veterans speechless. Jelly Roll showed up and the crowd treated him like a conquering hero. The pattern is there. The path is paved. And WWE, under the creative direction of Triple H, has become extraordinarily good at taking people from outside this world and integrating them into it in ways that feel organic rather than forced. Ishowspeed fits that blueprint better than almost anyone. He doesn't just know about wrestling, he loves it. He trained at the Performance Center. He took bumps. He learned the craft. He doesn't treat it like a photo opportunity, he treats it like something he genuinely wants to be part of. And that energy, that authenticity, is impossible to fake in front of a live WWE crowd. They know. The fans always know. And the crowd in Boston knew. They popped for him. Not the polite celebrity pop where people are acknowledging that they recognize a famous face. They were into it. They were cheering Speed like he was one of their own. Because in that building, on that night, he kind of was. Now the question everyone is asking, the question that has been lighting up every wrestling forum, every comment section, every Discord server since the moment that Pearce dropped is, what does this mean for WrestleMania 42? Internally, according to multiple reports, WWE has had discussions about Speed being involved in the show in Las Vegas. What form that takes is still unclear. Is he a guest host? A special enforcer? Does he end up in an actual match? Does the Danhausen storyline build into something more? The pieces are all in motion, and Triple H's team rarely puts this many pieces in motion without knowing exactly where they're going. The WrestleMania season is the most important stretch of the WWE calendar. Every decision made on Raw and SmackDown between now and Las Vegas is a brick in the foundation of the biggest show of the year. And the fact that Adam Pearce on television, in character, in the middle of all the Roman vs. Punk chaos and the Obafemi vs. Lesnar collision, made time to officially welcome Ishowspeed to Monday Night Raw, to stand there and say, "We're glad you're here," that is not an accident. That is a message. Speed is here. The curse is real. Danhausen has his chaos engine running. And WrestleMania 42 is 26 nights away, or rather, by the time you're watching this, considerably closer, and nobody, not even Adam Pearce, seems to know exactly what happens next. But isn't that exactly why we watch? That electricity, that unpredictability, the feeling of sitting in a crowd or on your couch at home and thinking it could be anything. It could go anywhere. The next person to step through that curtain could be a legend, a surprise, a 21-year-old with hundreds of millions of followers and a brand new curse hanging over his head. Wrestling, at its best, makes you feel like the world just expanded by about 3 sizes. And Monday Night Raw did that this week. It expanded. Ishowspeed is part of the Raw family now. Whether that's official in every legal and contractual sense of the word is still unfolding, but narratively, emotionally, in the language that wrestling actually speaks, it's done. He walked those halls. He did the Penta walk. He got cursed by Danhausen. He stood in front of a Boston crowd and they claimed him. That's as real as it gets in this business. And we will be watching every single week to see what happens next. If you enjoyed this breakdown, do us a favor, leave a comment down below and tell us, what do you want to see Ishowspeed do at WrestleMania 42? Does he take on Danhausen in an actual match? Does he get involved in a bigger rivalry? Or does the curse claim him before Vegas even arrives? Drop your theories, your predictions, your wildest fantasy bookings right there in the comments, because this community builds the best conversations in wrestling, and we want to hear from you. Hit that like button if you're here for Speed's WWE journey, and if you haven't subscribed to Wrestling Impact yet, now is the time, because this WrestleMania season is only getting wilder. Wheel.